Good afternoon. My name is Susanna Gurr, and on behalf of the team here at the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, I would like to welcome you to our webinar today. Before we begin, please take a moment to answer the poll on your screen. If you are participating with a colleague or in a group, as we know many of you are, please select the most appropriate or common answer. We will close the poll in a minute to let you know the results. For those of you who are not familiar with the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, it was created in 2012 with funding from the provincial and federal governments to act as a research and knowledge sharing organization for BC employment service providers and employers. The Centre's mandate is not only to do innovative research, but also to find ways to share that knowledge and promising practices with BC practitioners and employers. We created this webinar almost 1 year ago as a way to reach out and to connect with practitioners. Oops, sorry about that. Through this series, we have been highlighting new research by the Centre. We have been highlighting new research by the Centre, but are also tapping into the knowledge and expertise within the employment services community. You are invited to view the video recordings of previous webinars that we have posted on our website. We're delighted to continue our three-part series on working with individuals with mental health issues. This series is designed to support career development practitioners in their work with clients with mental health issues. However, the content of the series will be helpful to all staff members in employment programs. Today, the second of our three webinars will focus on applying principles of psychosocial rehabilitation and recovery to successfully engage clients in the supportive employment process. The presenters from Gastown Vocational Services will discuss the values and principles behind PSR and how you can put these principles into your daily practices. They will speak about strength-based approaches to client goal setting and wellness tools for supporting and sustaining employment. We will also be joined by Donna Dykeman, a trained Rapp facilitator, who will share with us her experience with using Rapp at work. That's Rapp is Recovery Action Plan for Work. I would like to welcome and introduce our two presenters again. Mariella and Sarah-Jane is a registered occupational therapist and the coordinator of Gastown Vocational Services, a specialized service offered through Vancouver Coastal Health that assists individuals with mental health conditions to reach their employment and educational goals. She has been a clinical associate professor at the School of Rehabilitation Sciences at the University of British Columbia for many years. Mariella's extensive experience working with specialized disability client groups in career development and case management have gained her a well-deserved reputation as an expert in the vocational rehabilitation field. Dr. Sarah-Jane Meechan is a clinical psychologist with a specialization in neuropsychology. Dr. Meechan has won multiple awards and grants in her career. Her research has been published in esteemed peer-reviewed scientific journals and presented internationally at conferences. She is currently registered as a psychologist in Alberta. In the last 3 years, Sarah was a registered psychologist at the Glen Rose Rehabilitation Hospital in Edmonton, where she applied her expertise in neuropsychology, psychological assessment and intervention to individuals with acquired brain injury, dementia, and psychiatric conditions. We are very lucky that Dr. Meechan has decided to return to BC, and she now brings her expertise in clinical neuropsychology and rehabilitation to Gastown Vocational Services. So just to the results of the poll, the question, have you used PSR model to support clients of mental health issues? We see that there are many participants in this webinar. This is new to. 52% are new to the PSR model, and 12 have had some training but have not applied it in their daily work. So before I turn it over to Mariella and Sarah, I have a few housekeeping items. The presentation will last approximately 45 minutes. We do have a high number of participants, and we will be muting the audience throughout the presentation. We encourage you to use the questions feature on your dashboards to submit questions, and my colleague Greg will be compiling the questions for Mariella and Sarah at the end of the presentation. We are recording the webinar and will post the video on our website along with a link to the presentation slides, so you can look at it later and continue the conversation. If you lose your connection, internet connection during the presentation, please reconnect using the link emailed to you. If you lose your phone connection, redial the phone number which appears under the Info tab and rejoin. Now, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Sarah and Mariella.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you very much, Susanna. We're delighted to be here this afternoon to do the second webinar with you. Thanks for joining in. In webinar 1, we touched on the recovery philosophy and the goal of psychosocial rehabilitation services in helping clients with mental health issues to get a life by facilitating opportunities for work and education. Our focus today and my portion of this webinar is to really look at how do we apply the PSR principles and values in our day-to-day work with clients to successfully engage each person in his or her vocational or employment planning process. I'm going to list the principles and values that we touched on briefly up on the screen for you to see, so we can go over quickly, and then I will go into the applications of the principles. So as career practitioners, we have the key PSR principles that guide our work, and these are the principles that convey hope and respect, recognize that culture and diversity are central to recovery, engage each client in the process of shared decision-making as much as possible, and facilitate partnerships with family partners such as mental health clinicians, staff, other agencies, and employers. We want to build on the client's strengths and capabilities using a strength-based approach. And this is something that Dr. Sarah Meachin will describe in more detail in her portion. Be person-centered and address the distinct needs of each individual promoting self-determination, empowerment, health and wellness, and facilitate the development of personal supports and networks. Again, the recovery goal is to help each individual in all aspects of their lives, including social, occupational, educational, intellectual, spiritual, and financial. So how do we apply these principles in our day-to-day work? Well, the application of these principles really starts the minute the client walks through the door. We want to look at how do we convey hope and respect. Well, the environment needs to be welcoming, and that means reception needs to be welcoming, and try and see the client within the time slot that they were supposed to be seen in. Acknowledge the person as they arrive in the door and not keep them waiting if possible. So in the first few sessions that you meet with the client, it's been shown with mental health clients that these are really, really important. And they're fundamental to build the relationship and the alliance for working together. We spoke in the last webinar about the characteristics of the career practitioner that were associated with positive employment outcomes. And again, it was within these first few sessions that really colored the outcome and the positive impact of working with the client. So you want to ensure that the client has a degree of comfort and provide information about what your expectations are and explain your role to the client as mentor, coach, or support person. It's important to try and use language that conveys the message that our goal is to work collaboratively with the client being in the driver's seat. That's so important. So we want to kind of approach each client with genuine curiosity, with a sense of professional warmth, and respond thoughtfully in a non-judgmental way with compassion. It's through that process that hope and respect is conveyed. Language is also an important thing to think about as we try and use the client's language to summarize their thoughts and ideas. There was a very interesting example that Sarah and I encountered the other day with a client, and during the session he used the word authentic on several different occasions. So we explored, well, what did authentic mean to this person? It meant he wanted a job that was simple, that his disability and diagnosis would be accepted, and that also his unique appearance would be accepted. So this word authentic meant that he would be true to himself in an employment situation. And that was really the key to how we would develop not only his strengths, but these values and apply them in a setting that matched his idea of being authentic to himself. So language can be very important in establishing the relationship and the alliance. During the session, check in with the client. How are they doing? And I think it's important to acknowledge and thank the client for sharing personal information, because it takes often a lot of guts to share such deeply personal information. Also, it's helpful in providing hope to provide insights on how you may have, as your agency and other career practitioners, have helped clients in similar situations. Also, use of peers who can share their recovery journey can be a really powerful impact on other clients. Next slide. So also motivationally interviewing techniques are also very helpful in the initial stages of engagement, and they're strategies that really do help create that basis of trust. The value of shared decision-making, self-determination, and empowerment. Again, setting the stage to work collaboratively, you establish first where the client is at. What pace would they like to have their sessions at? How fast, how slow do they wish to proceed? And where would they like to be? Explain that finding a job is important, that they find a job that they like, and that is the key. Involve the client as much as possible in the goal setting and planning process. I know we've all been given guidelines, and each agency will have kind of protocols and guidelines that we have to follow. But if you imagine providing some flexibility and choice to how you deliver the things that you need to do, can also often be very engaging to the client. So you have the opportunity to ask them what they would like to do next as part of the planning process, but also explaining to them what needs that you have in terms of the service delivery model that you're working from. In preparing for this webinar, I came across a very what I thought was a great quote from Patricia Deegan, a clinical psychologist and consumer. She mentions that practitioners need to be teachers of choice and effective choice making. So how do we do this? Effective choice making entails looking at experience, providing good information for choice, and then prompt feedback. Being the essentials of learning. So offering clients choices helps empower them. Ask about their preferences about employment services. What has worked in the past for them? What hasn't worked? Would they like one-to-one group in services, or would they prefer to start at a certain time of day. So finding out their preferences is important in establishing that empowerment and shared decision making as you work out a plan together. Looking at building on strengths and capabilities. Sometimes clients can come in and be somewhat hard on themselves, and it's important to help the client identify their accomplishments. Often they are not able to identify or recognize these easily. So as career practitioners, you can point out, even if they've worked one day, that one day was a good experience for them, and help them to recognize that these are all skills that they have. With the goal setting component, clients may come in and not be able to formulate the steps, and I think we as practitioners can help guide and break down those steps into manageable, practical steps to get them to their desired end result. Also, asking what kind of support they would like. And this can be really different for different clients. What we may think is support may be very unique for that individual. So I often ask clients, what does support look like for them, and who else they may want to be involved in their employment planning process. So in helping clients develop their awareness of skills and strengths and assets, we're working in a client-centered fashion. And just to wrap up some final thoughts in terms of client-centeredness is observing the client throughout the session. Are they getting overwhelmed? You know, you can check in with them and ask how things are going. I often like to summarize at the end of the session what was accomplished, so they have a sense of that you were listening, and that there is a plan that you've come up with, what you will do for the next session and what they will do. Important to ask what they felt, how the session went, and how do they think the next session, what would they like the next session to look like. So it is through that collaborative process that sets the stage for good goal setting and planning. So now I'd like to turn this second part of the webinar to Dr. Sarah Meechan to talk about strength-based approaches.
Thank you, Mariella. So Mariella has already introduced the topic of strength-based, focusing on eliciting people's strengths as career practitioners, job developers, and other service providers. I'm going to be talking about that in more depth. But first I want to talk about sort of the traditional way of doing things, just as a point of contrast. So traditionally, at least this is the way that I was trained, the focus of an assessment or an intervention was usually on a problem, a deficit, some area that was weak and a problem that needed to be fixed. The goal of an assessment and intervention in the traditional approach is to identify those problems and then solve them. And there's a lot of processes that might be involved in that sort of an approach, but they essentially boil down to identifying the problems and their causes, identifying goals and creating a plan to achieve those goals, implementing the plan, and then evaluating whether or not it was successful. Some of the key features of a traditional approach is an emphasis on experts. So clients come to us, and we, the experts, tell them what's wrong with them and how they can go about getting better. And this type of approach really, and one end result is that interventions are prescribed based on a diagnosis instead of individualized. Now, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The traditional approach has had many important benefits. So it's allowed us to understand about some of the origins of mental health conditions. It's been very important in guiding research and in planning interventions that work for people with certain symptoms and challenges. Unfortunately, there's an increasing recognition that this view also has limitations. So it's contributed to stigma, over-focus on problems and challenges can mask the many strengths and assets that our clients come to the table with. And it also sometimes results in a one-size-fits-all approach to planning interventions. So an alternative or a supplementary way of looking at assessment intervention is the strength-based approach. I don't have time to go into the history of this approach, but suffice it to say it has origins in clinical psychology, social service, and social work, and it's also very strongly consumer-driven. A strength-based approach shows the other side of the coin when it comes to our clients. Instead of focusing on problems and deficits, we focus on strengths and capacities. The goal is not to identify and solve problems, but to foster resilience in people. The key features of a strength-based approach are really the assumptions of a strength-based approach are that every person has strengths and potential, regardless of where they come from. Change is not only possible, but it's inevitable. And service providers are partners with clients. They're both experts. The relationship's based on trust, respect, and empathy, and capacity building is both a process and a goal. So why is this so important for vocational and career practitioners? Well, employment, of course, depends on people's strengths, skills, and abilities. Our clients will have more success, a greater degree of hope, and more confidence in themselves if we start from a place of strengths. Also, focusing on strengths results in greater client engagement in the employment process. And as we'll talk about a little bit more, the idea is not to mask or ignore problems or challenges, but to balance that focus with a lens to strengths as well. Probably the definition of strength-based assessment that I find really encapsulates everything that's important about this approach is this one by Epstein and Sharma. So they say that the strength-based assessment is the measurement of those emotional and behavioral skills, competencies, and characteristics that create a sense of personal accomplishment, contribute to satisfying relationships with family members, peers, and adults, enhance one's ability to deal with adversity and stress, and promote one's personal, social, and academic development. I did a lot of reflection when I was preparing this presentation, self-reflection, looking at how much of what I do is strength-based. And this quotation here from Wayne Hammond really speaks to the fact that as much as our clients may need to change in many ways, a lot of it is that the change needs to begin with us. It's easy to as employment career practitioners, it's easy to get caught up in barriers, identifying them, removing them. The challenges of our clients are often more obvious to us than their strengths and might actually be the reason that they got in the door in the first place. It's still important for us to deal with those barriers, but let's widen our scope. The client does hold the key, but we can help them unlock doors, and we can help them realize their own potential. If you're going to purchase a book about a strength model, this is the one that I would recommend. It's in its 3rd edition at the moment and really provides a framework and strength-based tools that you can use in your own practice. And these are some of the assumptions of the approach that Rapp and Goscha, these authors, talk about. So all people have strengths and capacities. Under the right conditions, anyone can change. Growth comes from strengths. People are the experts of their own situation, and the problem is the problem, not the person. Problems can actually blind us from noticing strengths. People have good intentions, and they're doing the best they can with what they've got. And most importantly, the ability to change is within all of us. Contrasting these two approaches, you might notice different language in coming from a traditional versus a strength-based approach. So in a traditional approach, we might talk of problems, whereas in a strength-based approach, we talk about challenges and opportunities. A traditional approach focuses on fixing things, whereas in strength-based, we're more likely to talk about facilitating. Rather than focusing on risk, we like to focus on potential. And instead of vulnerabilities, we look at capabilities. There are limitations that our clients are faced with, but there's also limitless potential. Rather than seeing our clients as victims of trauma and circumstance, we see them as survivors who have been steeled by their experiences, and that these experiences have allowed them to grow and provide evidence of their resilience. Rather than being dependent, we want to see our clients as empowered. And rather than seeing ourselves as the experts, we see clients as mutual experts. Rather than being prescriptive, we like to be collaborative. In strength-based practice, language matters. It's very important to avoid negative behavior descriptors. So when you're working with a client, it's tempting to use terms like unmotivated, disinterested, and we should really avoid those types of descriptors. We should also never, under any circumstances, refer to a person as their diagnosis. We never want to talk about our OCD client or our schizophrenic client. People come first. In strength-based assessment, we want to identify a foundation for further growth. So as Mariella mentioned earlier, find out what it is working or what has worked for the client in the past. Learn the client values, their preferences, and their attitudes, and help them identify their existing strengths. Again, this is something that's going to promote client engagement and make it much more likely that they'll be successful. But importantly, strength-based does not mean ignoring weaknesses. The point is never to minimize or mask problems. The point really is that change begins with strengths, and when we widen our lens to include strengths and capacities, we're doing a great service to our clients. There are many ways to conceptualize or chop up different types of strengths, and this is just one way to look at it. I've put it out there so that when you're working with the client, you can make a conscious effort to ask them or assess in other ways these types of strengths. So their personal attributes, their talents and skills, so whether they have specific training, whether they have a musical ability, those sorts of things. Thirdly, the environmental strengths. So not just looking at the strengths within the person, but looking at the strengths in their environment, in their system. So for example, do they have family support? Are they well connected to services? What's their housing situation, their transportation situation, their financial situation? And finally, though some people might not consider the last category strengths per se, I include it here because it's very important for client engagement to find out what they like, what they care about, what their values are. If a client comes to you and tells you that they're interested in medicine, don't blow it off as unrealistic. Try to get to the bottom of what that means to them. What about the medical field is interested to them, so that you can really try to help match them to a career that they'll really enjoy. We'll talk about sort of more formal measures of strength-based assessment, but one approach that you might consider using in your practice is a variation on the four-corner matrix, which was developed by Wright and Lopez. And basically what these authors are encouraging you to do is to look at 4 quadrants of a client. So not to just look at weaknesses within the self, but also to look at assets within the self. And to never forget the environment. So look at some of the barriers and challenges in the environment, but also the assets within the environment. If you want to get some of the most up-to-date research about strength-based assessment tools, I encourage you to read the article by Bird and colleagues. The references at the end of this webinar are at the end of the slides, but you can also Google the word strength and the word bird, and it will be one of the first links that appear. There are 12 tools that currently exist, and unfortunately most of them have limited research. in part because they're new tools, and this is a new and growing approach. But the findings of their study were that the strength assessment worksheet, which you can find in Rapp and Goscha's book, is the most widely researched and used qualitative tool. And in terms of quantitative tools, there is a measure called the Client Assessment of Strengths, Interests, and Goals, which does have some psychometric merit to it as well. And they recommend that both tools can be tentatively recommended within clinical practice. But to be honest, the evidence for a lot of these tools is currently limited because the research simply hasn't been done. What I would recommend all of you take a look at is an adaptation of the strength assessment worksheet called the Strengths Worksheet, which is currently being used by the Refocus study at King's College of London. These authors have adapted Rapp and Goscha's tool, and you can download the entire tool for free. Basically, the approach here, or this particular tool, covers 6 life domains, so daily living situation, financial, occupational, social supports, health, and spiritual and cultural. Obviously, from our perspective, the occupational domain is probably most relevant, but I encourage you to look at all of the domains since they're all important to the client. For each domain, there's a semi-structured interview, and there are sample questions and prompts provided, and it's used to assess the client's current situation, their desires and aspirations, and their personal and environmental resources in each of the domains. So one of the things Mariella and I talked about as we were preparing this webinar is that, how can we incorporate this as career practitioners? Well, I know that at Gastown Vocational Services and many of the other job sites around the province, job developers and case managers are asked to conduct a disability-related employment needs assessment, or DRENA. And what we would encourage you is in supplementing that, not just looking at the client's needs, but also looking for their strengths and their assets as well. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about wellness at work for people with mental health conditions. And initially, I didn't have a slide talking about why this would be important because I took it as so self-evident, but when I really thought about it, I came up with this slide. So first of all, many of our clients may not have a lot of work experience, or they may have been out of the workforce for a very long time. And any of us starting a new job, regardless of our health status, it's a very scary experience. And when you add in some of the challenges that our clients are facing, it can be a very daunting task. So clients may not, for example, know about workplace expectations, how to handle conflicts. They might not be used to schedules, waking up at a certain time of day, being somewhere on time, or even working in a team. And this has the potential to lead to some symptoms if it's not addressed in a proactive way. Now, the other reason that it's so important is that mental health symptoms can be triggered by stress. So I want to emphasize that when work matches the client's interests and skills, it actually promotes and maintains their wellness. But we need to arm our clients or help them develop strategies to deal with anxiety, frustration, and anger, and ways to problem solve and resolve conflicts in the workplace. I would say the number one factor in terms of wellness at work for people with mental health conditions is being proactive, not reactive. Working with clients to develop a wellness plan, actually writing it down and having it available and updating it as necessary. Rapp for Work is one example, and in a few minutes, Donna is going to speak to Rapp for Work. Identification of a support team is really important, which Mariella previously mentioned. So these could be formal supports, like a job developer, social worker, psychologist. There could be peer support workers involved, and supports in the work environment, or natural supports like family and friends. As much as possible, we want to help clients develop their natural support systems so that they don't have to depend as much on those formal supports. And then the importance of ongoing support once a client is employed. And it's so important to keep that conversation with clients going, because clients at times may insist that everything is fine. And then we don't find out that that's not the case until there's a crisis. So really being proactive and planning ahead. Challenges are going to come up. Let's have a plan for them. Also key is, and all of you as job developers and career practitioners know this, is finding a workplace that fits the client's strengths and needs. And this might include working with an employer to develop modified or flexible work schedules, job sharing. So for example, at Gastown, we may have clients where instead of one client working full-time, we have 2 or 3 clients sharing the workload. A position where on-the-job training is available is often desirable. We also want to emphasize the importance of helping the client with lifestyle choices and developing a work-life balance. So information about proper diet, exercise, leisure and social life, very important. A wellness plan should also help clients improve their self-awareness. So awareness of what their skills are, and awareness of what their barriers and weaknesses are as well. And importantly, clients need to have self-awareness of things that trigger them, things that increase their anxiety, for example, things that might lead them to feel angry or frustrated. Expect them, prepare for them, and come up with a plan. Donna will speak more to this, but helping clients to develop self-regulation skills is very important. We are fortunate enough to now live in a time where there are abundant resources online that you can use with clients, or that clients can use on their own to develop, for example, relaxation strategies such as deep breathing or progressive muscle relaxation, mindfulness, visualization and meditation. And I've just provided there one example that you can access on the internet from the Here to Help website, which is a managing anxiety toolkit that clients can use on their own or that you can help them through. Anger management strategies, for example, assertiveness training, can be another way to promote wellness at work. Preparation is key. So clients need to have an understanding about workplace expectations. If they've been out of the workplace for a while, or they don't have a lot of experience in the workplace, they might need some understanding about things like absence policies or late policies. Practice makes perfect, and it's important ahead of time to practice scenarios that could come up in the workplace. So just as you might have mock interviews for clients as they're doing the job search practice, having mock conflicts and learning how to resolve those conflicts so that you feel more prepared when they arise. Another important component is helping a client with their decision regarding disclosure. A client has no legal obligation to disclose a mental health condition unless it interferes with their job. However, disclosure can be desirable because it can protect a client's legal right to accommodations when problems arise. On the other hand, many clients are afraid to disclose because it may lead them open to discrimination in some work settings. There's different levels of disclosure that can be considered, so how much detail is shared with an employer. And the decision is always a personal one. It's very complex, and it needs to be in partnership with the client. If disclosure is chosen by the client, however, we recommend earlier disclosure because it allows for the employer to be more proactive and more understanding when problems occur, as opposed to it coming across as a last-ditch effort when things go wrong. And finally, workplace accommodations can be considered to promote wellness for people with mental health conditions. So at Gastown, we have clients that have many accommodations that might include things like periodic breaks. So for clients that might have attention deficit disorder or anxiety disorders, incorporating periodic breaks is helpful. Having an unconventional schedule, a quiet workspace to minimize distractions, an extended period of training, identification even of a workplace mentor or buddy, or as I mentioned previously, job sharing. So now I'm going to turn it over to Donna, who's going to discuss a specific wellness at work process called Rapp for Work.
Thanks, Mariella and Sarah, for asking me to join in today. I really appreciate your strengths-based approach and action, and I'm happy to be here. So my name's Donna, and I am a person with lived experience of both mental health and addictions issues. I'm using myself as a real-life example today, and will just refer to myself as a peer. So there I am at work.
Oh, I can't go backwards, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, we just flew through me at my desk, thanks to bit strips. It's all right. I'm in recovery. Before my recovery journey really began, oh, thank you, there I am, in recovery. Before my recovery journey really began, I was in senior management as a communications and marketing director, so doing things such as public relations, media, strategic planning, and so on. I'm still a creative professional, but I'm applying it in different ways now, and my main focus is peer outreach, advocacy, group facilitation, and anti-stigma work. That's my passion. But no matter what I do, I'm usually on the computer a lot. So this is my story, but Rapp for Work can adapt to all kinds of work roles, all kinds of workers, all kinds of workplaces, and we're all from diverse cultural and personal backgrounds, I should add. So I'm going to leave the slides to come up for you on the main points of Rapp and Rapp for Work, but I'll illustrate each one using my own experience as an example of each issue and plan. So Rapp stands for Wellness Recovery Action Planning, and essentially it's an evidence-based program developed by Marielle and Copeland with peers. She's a peer herself, and she started work in the 80s gathering evidence for what really works on the ground for our fellow peers and how to apply that and share that, which is done through the Copeland Institute. The focus is on easy, accessible, low-cost, self-directed actions. And I'll just leave the website that you saw on the first slide up for you to get more details on Rapp overall. But the key concepts involved are hope, personal responsibility, education, self-advocacy, and support. And those underpin everything we do in any kind of Rapp. It's a peer-facilitated awareness plus planning process. You do have to have done a Rapp yourself and take Copeland Institute training to facilitate, and that's the case for me, in fact. And that was part of my Rapp goals. So we'll move on now to Rapp for Work specifically, and I'll just leave you to refer back for more details at the website and what various folks involved with the Copeland Institute have to say on their reasons and background for creating Rapp. So there's two parts to this. Part one is the Wellness Toolbox, and part two is a 6-part wellness plan. And if we move on, I'll just speak to the Wellness Toolbox, but I just have to say that overall Rapp, which I did earlier on in my own recovery, wasn't an easy process for me, but it has definitely been worth it over time. The challenge is that you have to look at yourself honestly with supporters and get real with topics such as self-disclosure, self-esteem, and stigma, both internalized and external, some of the things that Sarah mentioned in her talk. But probably the biggest benefit for me going through the process was a change in my own worldview, and Mariella spoke to this as well. It was away from shame, covering up, self-medicating, as we call it in the recovery biz, feeling like a failure, and so on, transitioning or shifting to owning all of who I am as a whole person with strengths and challenges, and I can manage on a practical everyday basis instead of trying to live up to some perfect ideal, which I'd lived a very long time with, actually, and I discovered that things such as workaholism and perfectionism weren't in fact strengths, and I could support myself in other ways and bring other people in collaboratively to do that. So I know from experience how powerful a psychosocial rehab and strength-based approach can be. It starts with real hope, actual or authentic, as Mariella said, real life situations. It continues with respectful collaboration and keeps building on strengths. So let's move on to the Rapp for Work Toolbox. Whoops, sorry, going back again. Sarah and I are actually negotiating our slide changing, and I'm not being very helpful. So developing a wellness toolbox for work is again one of building awareness and then planning. So first, you have a self-documented, honest, non-judgmental, which is really important, self-examination or snapshot of your actual situation. So again, it's not about being a problem to be fixed. It's about collecting concrete information to develop the right wellness tools with work in mind. Second, you get a handy, practical, personalized takeaway in the form of wellness tools, which aren't about quick fixes or shoulds or other people. It's about being a whole person and having on-the-ground plans, resources, tactics that work, and ideas for things you can do to, in fact, self-coach. And as I used to do this professionally, strategic planning for yourself at work. Yep. So the next part is actually developing a wellness plan, and there's 6 parts of this. And it sounds complicated to start, but it's actually quite logical. When you work through it, you can enter at different points and come back and do and redo sections over time as well. So this is the daily maintenance plan, and I put the Just Breathe image in there up in the top right because the first thing on my daily maintenance plan is breathe. It's great to be able to check one thing off of my list right away. So if I wake up and I'm breathing, check, I've succeeded right off the bat. Plus, it's a humorous, gentle reminder to me that I do mindful breathing throughout the day, not just during a crisis, but year-round, whether I'm at work or at home, and it's really helpful for stress reduction. And that's actually a tool that I used beginning with Rapp because I learned an actual technique, and it's really helped over time. So the other graphic there in the corner is me doing my personalized yoga in there too. You'll see that some things you need to do daily, you can think of it as back to basics, but also things that you can do less frequently, maybe on a weekly or a few days a week basis. And of course, as well as reducing stress, this gets me out into a group activity. I do physical stretch and strength as well. So those are lots of tools combined in one activity that I enjoy. And the idea is to keep this simple. Use it not as someone else's plan you must follow to stay well, or prescriptive, as Sarah said, but really as a list of what you do every day and what you'd like to try when you're feeling as well as you can to maintain that state. Next slide, we'll talk about triggers. Sarah mentioned this as well, but it's hugely important on the job, and I'll just use my own experience as an example. So some are fixed. For example, death anniversaries can be huge triggers for a lot of people. And any other event or circumstance that sets off inner reactions in us. They can be trauma related. The point is that we really need to know what these are and how they affect our lives at work. So we can feel the feelings but not be swamped or overwhelmed by our own reactions. And we can increase our conscious choices and behaviors out of that. So if you're like me up there in the left-hand corner, you may experience some technical difficulties at work. And for me, they always seem to come under deadline. So when something goes wrong with my computer or I make a mistake with it at work, I do get triggered still. And I may always get triggered and can feel frustration, anger, helplessness, or panic. And that's going on. So with planning and wellness tools, I'm getting better and better at not feeling overwhelmed by my reactions. I'm recognizing them, I'm acknowledging them, and here's my plan for when I'm triggered in that particular way. I found it online when my computer was working, and it's in my wellness toolkit now. So what to do when you make a mistake? Here are the directions. So feel the feelings. Give yourself 10 minutes to be upset about it. Step 2, do what you can to fix it. 3, forgive yourself and move on. 4, repeat as necessary. So that allows me on the job to be myself as a whole person. Some things will shift over time for sure, but I'll probably always have technology rage. I've dealt with road rage in my life, but you know, all things are a process. So it's just fun. It makes me laugh as well, which is helpful, and it works. So next, we'll move on to early warning signs. So now we're moving on to an actual spectrum. This is an opportunity for early intervention, early warning signs. I call them the EWS, E-W-S. I know that either one of the graphics on this slide could probably be an early warning sign, but I'm going to take the one on the top right-hand corner because a subtle sign for me that I'm heading somewhere I don't want to be is spending too much time and energy online. And you see that in the cartoon, my partner is helping me realize it. Are you coming to bed? No, I can't. Why? Because someone is wrong on the internet. And you can bring in supporters to help you realize these things, of course. And it's in the spirit of not judging you or policing you, but actually helping you in a practical way to realize an early warning sign because they know you. So I know in myself that when I'm too attached to the computer, I get too revved up to sleep properly. And really, almost anything can be used addictively out there. It's not what you're using, but how, I've found. And my action plan depicted here is to spend less time online, especially before bed. Let's change it up, get outside more, have some fun, maybe learn a new skill, walk, cycle, or skateboard to work. But the last option isn't really a very realistic plan for me. So I'll stick with the other options, go back to my daily maintenance plan, and use the wellness tools that work for me, such as having a ready-to-sleep routine that doesn't involve electronics. Next, if we're moving along the continuum, which can actually loop and go in different directions at various speeds, back and forth, not in a linear way, is when things are breaking down. So you see me there, still up at night, having insomnia, even though I changed things up and did some good stuff. I know about myself that when I have more than 3 nights a week of bad sleep, I stop being able to manage at work very well. That's just a fact, and for a lot of people too. So I'll own that, and the feeling that while I'm still in the driver's seat, I'm facing heavy traffic now, and I'm getting lost. And you can see the risky intersection there, which I feel that I'm in. And this is my specific plan in the case of insomnia and its effect on me at work. Acknowledge it. Own it. Then I'm going to call my doctor today about my insomnia and possible solutions. I'll check in with my supporters at home and work, and I'll try other wellness tools and still go back to the daily maintenance plan basics. So I'll see what I can do to be able to focus on getting the insomnia and its effects under control. Maybe I can get a deadline extension or bring in another team member to help. In the meantime, I'll talk to my work mentor about how to approach my project manager and do just that. Okay? So next, we have crisis. And moving along, sometimes crisis happens, and it can take different forms for different people, again, very individualized. Sometimes for me, even if I'm taking one day at a time, which you see in the upper right, that's a wellness tool, by the way, one day at a time, several days do attack at once. So you can see me there now, feeling gray, small, sinking into the mountains, heading down. I'm not trying to make light of the situation because it's serious and not something to snap out of, but I'm working as a self-coach with myself affectionately now, which is something I didn't used to do. When I feel like this, I know that it's time for others to step in because I just can't drive anymore. I'm past the point where I can manage on my own. So the crisis plan is itself something that has multiple parts, everything from medical history to contact information to preferences in case of needed treatments. And having everything together in one place if crisis should strike is incredibly helpful in itself. And proactive planning, even if just in case, is incredibly responsible. I deal with these issues. Here's an offered solution proactively. So there's another strength, but it requires workplaces and co-workers' support to see it as that. And that's something I'm really passionate about too, encouraging that in the workplace. So I no longer manage day-to-day if I'm not able to make phone calls at all. That's a crisis signal for me and certainly relevant to any work in communications and marketing. And I call it phonophobia. So this is really important. I have to call in a work supporter while I concentrate on this. It doesn't necessarily mean time off work, but I might need to. And again, I would indicate that in my plan. Finally, post-crisis planning is something that's really important and often skipped, but it's essentially an opportunity for responsible reentry and review, reflection, and growth for ourselves as well. So you don't have to be perfect to get back to work, and you don't have to quit if you're not, is the attitude. And maybe you need an accommodation, such as, I'll be most effective working 3 days a week for the first month I'm back. That's a wellness tool and part of your plan. So supporting yourself and your work life is respectful of yourself and others. It takes courage, a team approach, and does get progressively better over time. So the Maya Angelou quote there is one of my wellness tools as well. Do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better. And finally, thanks for listening. Today I took the Rapp tab there, but there's also patience, courage, healing, strength, and so on. Take what you need and have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you to Sarah-Jane and Mariella for the presentation today. We're near the end of our time today, but we did have a few questions come up during the presentation. So let's take a look at those. The first question is, I think it came up earlier in the webinar. How do you practically reconcile the client's expectation of being authentic in the workplace and the high competitiveness of the current labor market where employers are highly selective to meet the needs of their operation and typically look for a match?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not an easy question to answer. But for me, it starts with the client. That's what the client's values are, and then it's about matching them with the right employer. So, for example, with that particular client, I had a chance to work with that particular client and his wonderful job developer, Joanna Lundy, at Gastown Vocational Services, and I have witnessed her helping seek employment opportunities for him, and that's one of the first things that she's going to ask them about. Is this an environment where my client is going to be okay having visible tattoos or having visible piercings? And if those are things that are not going to be accommodated by that work setting, it's just not going to be a good fit for that client. So certainly it can put some limitations on the types of employment that are available to clients, but it is a much higher likelihood that then they will be able to maintain that employment and maintain their wellness in that setting. Yeah, and this particular client wanted a simple job. So they weren't looking for a job in a law office or a high-paced business job. They were really looking for something like, you know, food preparation, dog grooming, cleaning out stalls, those types of things. So we really wanted to respect his value of authenticity, what that meant to him. And yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Earlier in the presentation, you used the term consumer-driven during the strength-based approach. Could you explain what that word means? Okay, great.
Better.
Thanks. Usually what's used in, well, all sectors really is the word consumer. I use people with lived experience myself, or peer. They all mean the same thing. But it really means that we're not looking at a passive object upon which we're going to force feed success tips or prescribe, sorry, I didn't really mean force feed, but you get the idea, prescribe a program to follow or else. You're really looking at the consumer or the peer or the person with lived experience driving the process rather than going from a one-size-fits-all approach, as Sarah said.
And time for one more question. This one specifically refers to Work BC, so I'm not sure if you can answer it, but the question is, in the new model of Work BC service delivery, a client with a disability will not receive specialized supports unless they clearly represent their needs to the intake worker. With the strengths-based assessment, when does a client disclose the details of their needs?
Excellent question. I think the strength-based approach, you need to look at needs as well as strengths. So they're both relevant. I think sometimes our focus can be solely on what the client needs. This is just to supplement the needs so we can also acknowledge what the strengths are in doing the plan. So both are important.
Yeah, and I definitely empathize with the person asking this question, because it can be very frustrating. Mariella and I were talking about this morning when a referral is made to me with the question, does this client have a learning disability or does this client have ADHD? So the sort of purpose of the assessment gets at a need or a disability. So it's not about ignoring those needs or not identifying them anymore. It's about augmenting our assessments with widening the scope to include strengths and capacities.
Okay, and again, we're a few minutes over time, so we're going to end it there, but we do encourage you to submit any further questions that you have to the blog post, which the link will be sent out later this week in the follow-up email. So thanks again to Mariella, Sarah-Jane, and Donna for joining us today for this wonderful presentation. And thanks to all of you for attending the webinar today. The session was recorded, and we will post the video of the presentation on our website and continue the conversation there. You will receive an email later this week with a link to the presentation and video. Unfortunately, we have found that the system does not record those of you connecting only by phone as having attended, so you may receive an email saying that we're sorry you were unable to attend. If that's the case and you would like a confirmation of your attendance, please contact us at the address in the email. As always, we welcome your input and feedback. We would also appreciate any suggestions you have for future webinar topics. And a few quick announcements before we end today. The final session of the three-part webinar series is scheduled for May 14th. It will focus on the main features and best practices of supported employment, as well as applications for clients in your daily work and supports to clients on the job and for employers. On May 21st, we will welcome researcher Wendy Bancroft to present the Centre study on accessibility for specialized populations in one-stop employment centres, best practices from the UK, US, and Australia. Now, when you leave the session, you will receive a link to a short survey. It will take about 1 to 2 minutes, and your feedback will help us immensely for planning future webinars. Again, if you participated in this webinar with a colleague or in a group, please select the most appropriate or common answers. Thank you in advance. Well, that ends our webinar for today. On behalf of the BC Centre for Employment Excellence, thank you and have a great afternoon.